A young girl, just 10 years old. No one in that courtroom expected her to speak, but when she did, everything changed. That's a lie. You're all wrong. Her voice cut through the silence, her eyes locked on the accused. At first, no one took her seriously, until she showed them the truth. A single photo, a secret buried deep, and now the people who wanted it hidden were coming for her. If you believe that one voice can change everything, that the truth deserves to be heard no matter the cost, then this is a story you can't miss. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because sometimes the smallest voices uncover the biggest lies. And once the truth is out, there's no going back. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that made people hold their breath without realizing it. Judge Harold Dean, known for his no-nonsense demeanor, tapped his gavel sharply against the bench, a silent command for order. The trial of Michael Gaines, a once respected businessman now accused of embezzling millions, had reached its most crucial moment. The prosecution was preparing to deliver its closing argument, the final piece before the jury would decide his fate. And then, a voice rang out. "That's not true! You're all wrong!" The words sliced through the silence like a blade. A collective gasp rippled through the packed courtroom. People twisted in their seats, searching for the source of the interruption. Standing in the middle of the aisle was a young girl, no older than 10. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit in one arm, her small frame looking out of place in the grand courtroom. But her expression, determined, unwavering, made it clear she wasn't afraid. Her finger pointed directly at Michael Gaines. The prosecutor froze mid-sentence. The defense attorney's pen slipped from his grasp. Even Gaines himself, who had sat stone-faced through the entire trial, looked stunned. Judge Dean's brow furrowed behind his thick glasses. He lowered his gavel, eyes narrowing at the child. "Who are you?" His voice was steady, but the disbelief in it was unmistakable. For a moment, the girl hesitated, shifting her grip on the rabbit. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "My name is Emily," she declared, "and I can prove he didn't do it." The courtroom, once filled with the murmurs of experienced attorneys and hardened reporters, fell into complete silence. All eyes were on her. And in that moment, Emily Hartman, a girl who shouldn't have mattered in a case this big, had just turned the entire trial on its head. It had started weeks ago, on an ordinary evening in Emily's small living room. She sat curled up on the couch, hugging her stuffed rabbit, as the flickering glow of the television filled the space. Her mother, Jessica, was flipping through channels absent-mindedly, barely paying attention. Then, the news anchor's voice caught Emily's ear. "Businessman Michael Gaines on trial for embezzling millions. Prosecutors claim irrefutable evidence ties him to fraudulent transactions." Emily's brow furrowed as the screen flashed with images of Gaines being led into the courthouse. She knew that face. Not from the news, not as some rich businessman. She had seen him before. "That's the man who helped Mrs. Turner fix her roof last year," Emily blurted out, sitting up straighter. Jessica sighed, shaking her head. "Yeah, and now people are saying he stole from them." Emily frowned. It didn't make sense. She remembered how Mrs. Turner, an elderly woman who lived a few houses down, had struggled after a storm wrecked part of her roof. She couldn't afford repairs. Then, out of nowhere, Michael Gaines showed up with a crew and fixed it. For free. A man who would do something like that. Would he really steal money from people? Something felt wrong. That thought nagged at her, pulling at the edges of her mind, refusing to let go. And so, the next day after school, she found herself at the local library, staring at a computer screen, digging. At first, it was just news articles, the same headlines everyone else had seen. But Emily wasn't looking for the big details. She was looking for the things no one else cared about. The small things. Hours passed. Her eyes ached. She clicked through endless pages, cross-checking dates, events, locations. Then she found it. A photo, a blog post from a small community website, barely noticed by the public. The image was clear: Michael Gaines standing in the middle of a charity event, shaking hands, smiling. The problem? The timestamp on the image. It placed him miles away from the office at the exact moment the fraudulent documents were supposedly signed. Emily's heart pounded. She clicked the image, enlarged it, studied every detail. The time was right. The date was right. If this photo was real, then the entire case against Gaines was built on a lie. Her hands trembled as she hit print. She stared at the paper as it slid out of the machine, the ink still fresh. She had just stumbled upon something big, something no one else had noticed, and she had no idea what kind of trouble it was about to bring. Emily knew one piece of evidence wouldn't be enough. A single photo, no matter how damning, could be dismissed, questioned, or ignored. She needed more, something undeniable. So she did what no one else had bothered to do. She kept digging. Her investigation started small. She printed articles, compared timestamps, even checked weather reports to see if they aligned with witness testimonies. But the real clues didn't come from the internet. They came from her mother's diner. Jessica's diner was a quiet, overlooked place, a spot where businessmen, contractors, and lawyers passed through, never thinking twice about who might be listening. And Emily? She was invisible to them, just a kid in the corner, scribbling in a notebook, pretending to do homework. They never noticed how she listened, how she remembered. It started one afternoon when she heard two men in suits sitting at the counter. "She's gonna bury him," one muttered, stirring his coffee. "Gaines?" the other replied. "He doesn't stand a chance. They made sure of that." That made Emily's stomach tighten. They made sure? She kept her head down, her fingers gripping her pencil as she listened. "I'm just saying," the first man continued, lowering his voice. "The paperwork was perfect. No one's asking the right questions." Emily's heart pounded. She didn't know who these men were, but they knew something. Later, as she cleared tables near where they had been sitting, she spotted a receipt one of them had left behind. She grabbed it, stuffing it into her pocket before anyone could see. It wasn't much, just proof that they had been there. Proof of the date and time. But it was something. Over the next few days, Emily collected more. Scraps of receipts, copies of schedules, anything that could prove inconsistencies in Gaines's case. It was like putting together a puzzle, and each piece only made the picture clearer. Someone was framing him. She wanted to tell her mom. She wanted to tell Mr. Bennett. But deep down, she knew what they would say. Stay out of it. So she didn't. And when the day of the trial arrived, Emily made a decision. She waited until her mom was busy at work, then grabbed her backpack, stuffed her evidence inside, and slipped out the door. The courthouse wasn't far, but every step felt heavier than the last. She knew she was breaking the rules. She knew her mom would lose it if she found out. But none of that mattered, because if she didn't speak up, who would? As she approached the courthouse doors, her heart pounded in her chest. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on her stuffed rabbit, and stepped inside. She wasn't just a kid anymore. She was a witness, and she was about to change everything. The moment Emily spoke, the room shifted. It was subtle at first, a murmur rippling through the audience, a few exchanged glances, but then the whispers grew, rolling through the courtroom like a rising tide. Judge Dean leaned forward, his sharp eyes locking onto Emily. "You have proof?" Emily nodded, her hands shaking as she reached into her backpack. She pulled out the folded piece of paper, the photo she had printed from the library. Timestamp was clear, bold, undeniable. The judge motioned for the bailiff to take it. As the paper changed hands, Emily's heart pounded. What if no one believed her? What if they thought she was just some kid playing detective? The bailiff handed the paper to Judge Dean. The judge's eyes scanned the image. His expression, usually stone-cold and unreadable, changed. His brow furrowed. His lips pressed into a thin line. Then, before he could speak, a voice exploded from the back of the room. "She's lying!" A loud gasp erupted as all heads snapped toward the source. A man, dressed in a suit, his face red with panic, had shot to his feet. His eyes were wild, darting between Emily and the judge. Emily stiffened. She recognized him. One of the men from the diner. "She's a kid," he barked, his voice shaking. "She doesn't know what she's talking about. This is ridiculous. This trial is a joke if you're going to listen to some child's internet nonsense." "Enough." Judge Dean's voice sliced through the room like a blade. He brought his gavel down hard, his patience clearly gone. "Sit down, or I will have you removed," the judge ordered. The man hesitated, his face pale, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. But as the bailiffs moved toward him, he sat, too quickly, like a man who had just realized he made a mistake. Emily swallowed. That reaction, that fear, told her everything she needed to know. Judge Dean turned back to the evidence, lifting the photo again. He examined it carefully before shifting his gaze to the prosecution. "Miss Bradshaw," he said, his voice measured but firm, "I assume this is the first time you're seeing this?" The prosecutor, who had spent the entire trial looking confident and in control, now looked uneasy. She adjusted her glasses, her lips tightening. "Your Honor, while this appears to be legitimate, we cannot verify its authenticity in real time." Judge Dean's stare didn't waver. "Then we will. I want a forensic team to analyze this immediately. If what this young lady is saying is true, it means the foundation of this case is compromised." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. Michael Gaines, the man who had sat silent and defeated for days, suddenly looked alive. He turned to Emily, eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Emily's chest swelled with hope. She had done it. She had made them listen, but as she exhaled, the weight in her stomach refused to lift. Because when she glanced back toward the man who had shouted, toward the stranger who had panicked at her words, he wasn't looking at her anymore. He was whispering, speaking to another man seated beside him, both their heads low, their eyes flicking toward her, and then one of them turned and smirked. Emily's stomach dropped. She had just made herself a target. Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, her stuffed rabbit tucked tightly under her arm. The courtroom had been a whirlwind, but she had done it. She had made them listen. The truth was coming out. But as she stared at the piece of paper in her hands, the weight of it all settled in. She had made powerful people angry. Her phone buzzed beside her. She reached for it, expecting a message from her mom, maybe even Mr. Bennett. But when she saw the notification, a chill spread down her spine. "Unknown number. Stop digging. This is your only warning." Her fingers clenched around the phone. The screen felt cold in her hands. The message was short, simple, but it was enough to send her heart pounding. She swallowed hard and glanced toward the window. Outside, the street was dimly lit by flickering lamps, the neighborhood quiet. But then she saw it. A car, parked across the street. Black. Engine running. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone was inside, but she couldn't see through the dark-tinted windows. It wasn't moving. It was just watching. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Slowly, she backed away from the window, her fingers gripping her phone like a lifeline. "Mom?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. No answer. She remembered. Jessica had gone to work the night shift at the diner. She was alone. Emily's stomach twisted. She forced herself to breathe, to think. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was imagining it. But deep down, she knew better. Minutes passed. The car never moved. Finally, she grabbed her curtains and yanked them shut, blocking the sight of it. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. Hours later, long after she had turned off her lights, she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Then she heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable, the front door handle rattling. Her body went rigid. The sound came again, metal jiggling. Then, a soft click. Someone was trying to get in. Panic surged through her. She bolted upright, barely able to breathe. The door creaked. Emily didn't think. She moved. She grabbed her stuffed rabbit and slipped off the bed, her feet barely making a sound as she crept toward the closet. A soft thud. The front door had opened. Emily's hands trembled as she eased inside the closet, pushing herself into the farthest corner. She pressed her back against the wall, hugging her rabbit tightly against her chest. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. She bit her lip hard to keep from making a sound. The footsteps moved toward her room. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The air inside the closet felt suffocating. Then, the floorboard outside her door creaked. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, her entire body frozen. The footsteps stopped. Silence. For a moment, she thought maybe, just maybe, the person had left. Then, the closet handle twisted. Emily's heart nearly stopped. The door didn't open. Whoever was out there was testing it. She clenched her teeth, willing herself not to make a sound. Seconds stretched into eternity. And then, the handle released. More silence. Then the footsteps retreated. She listened, every nerve in her body on fire, until she finally heard it. The front door opening again. Then closing. The intruder was gone. But Emily knew the truth. They hadn't come to steal. They hadn't come to scare her. They had come for her. Emily barely slept that night. Every creak in the house, every rustle of the wind outside sent shivers down her spine. She kept the closet door slightly open, as if she might have to slip inside again at a moment's notice. By morning, she had made up her mind. She couldn't keep this to herself. With her backpack slung over her shoulder, she rushed out the door, gripping Rachel's notebook as if it were a lifeline. The courthouse was her destination. She needed to find Mr. Bennett. The law office was buzzing with activity when she arrived. The receptionist barely looked up before recognizing her from the trial. "He's in a meeting," she said, sounding preoccupied. "It's important," Emily insisted, standing on her tiptoes to peek past the desk. Before the woman could respond, Mr. Bennett's voice rang out from his office. "Let her in." Emily didn't wait for permission. She hurried inside, shutting the door behind her. Mr. Bennett sat behind a massive desk, stacks of files scattered around him. His expression softened when he saw her. "Emily, you okay?" Emily pulled the notebook from her backpack and set it down. "I found more." Curious, he flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with every note, every scribbled account number. "Rachel kept all of this?" he muttered. "She must have been working on this for months, maybe years." Emily sat down, gripping the chair's armrest. "This proves he didn't do it, doesn't it?" Mr. Bennett exhaled, rubbing his temple. "This could change everything." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But Emily, listen to me. This is dangerous. These people aren't just thieves. They're the kind who make problems disappear. You showing up in that courtroom put a target on your back." Emily swallowed hard. "I know." He studied her, then sighed. You're not going to walk away from this, are you? She shook her head. A small, proud smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Then we do it smart. We don't rush. We verify every document in this notebook before we take it to the court. We make sure it's airtight. If we're exposing these people, we need to do it right. Emily nodded, gripping her stuffed rabbit inside her backpack for reassurance. Mr. Bennett stood. Go straight home, okay? Lay low. Let me handle this from here. Emily agreed, but as she left his office, unease prickled at the back of her neck. Something wasn't right. She stepped outside the courthouse, blinking against the sunlight, and that's when she saw it. The black car, parked across the street, engine running, watching. Her breath caught. She tried to act normal, walking toward the bus stop, but she could feel the driver's gaze on her. As she turned the corner, she risked a glance back. The car was still there, waiting. Her pace quickened. By the time she reached her house, her hands were shaking as she fumbled with the keys. She shut the door, bolting it behind her, pressing her back against the wood as she tried to slow her breathing. Then, a knock. A sharp, deliberate knock. Emily's stomach twisted. She wasn't expecting anyone. She crept toward the window, moving the curtain just enough to see. Her blood turned to ice. It was him. The man from the courtroom. The man who had shouted when she revealed the truth. The same man who had been in that black car. He was standing on her doorstep, and he was smiling. Jessica's voice trembled as she whispered, Emily, step away from the door. Emily barely moved, her eyes locked on the shadowy figure standing outside. The man from the courtroom. The man from the car. He wasn't knocking anymore, he was just waiting. Then, he tried the handle. Jessica grabbed Emily's arm and yanked her back just as the door rattled. Go! Get your things! Now! Emily sprinted to her room, grabbing her backpack, her stuffed rabbit, and the notebook filled with Rachel's notes. She had been right. They weren't going to stop. Jessica's hands were shaking as she grabbed her phone and dialed. Bennett! We need to go! Now! The next few minutes were a blur. Jessica's car peeled out of the driveway, tires screeching as they sped down the road. In the rearview mirror, Emily saw the black car. It was following them. Her heart pounded. They're still behind us. Jessica gritted her teeth, gripping the wheel tighter. Hold on. The city streets blurred past as they swerved onto back roads, trying to lose their tail. But the black car stayed close. Every turn. Every light. It was right there. Then headlights flashed in the distance. Another car. Mr. Bennett. His SUV cut across the road, slamming to a stop between them and the pursuers. The black car hesitated. Then, with a screech of tires, it disappeared into the night. Emily let out a shaky breath. For now, they were safe. They arrived at the safe house an hour later, a small, isolated lodge tucked into the hills far from prying eyes. Inside, Mr. Bennett pulled out his laptop, his face set in determination. We need to go through everything, every file, every document. We find out who's behind this and we take them down. Emily and Jessica sat beside him as he scanned through Rachel's notes, and then they saw it. A list. Names, dates, secret transfers. Not just one corrupt businessman. Judges, lawyers, government officials, people with real power. Jessica swallowed hard. This is bigger than we thought. Bennett nodded grimly. And Rachel knew. That's why they wanted her silenced. Emily's stomach twisted. Where is she now? Silence. Then, Bennett exhaled. She's missing. Emily's blood ran cold. We have to find her, she said. Bennett hesitated. Emily, we have to. She's the only one who knows everything. If they get to her before we do. Jessica cut in. Where would she go? Bennett pulled up his phone. She mentioned a safe spot once, a cabin, deep in the woods outside the city. If she's hiding, that's where she'll be. Emily tightened her grip on her stuffed rabbit. They had no choice. They had to go. The cabin was exactly as Emily had imagined. Dark, secluded, hidden beneath towering trees. The wind howled through the forest as they stepped onto the creaky porch. Bennett knocked. "Rachel? It's us." No answer. He knocked again. "Rachel, we know you're in there." Then, movement inside. A shadow near the window. Slowly, the door cracked open. Rachel's face was pale, her hair disheveled, her eyes filled with fear. She held a knife. "Stay back," she whispered. "You don't know what you've done." Bennett raised his hands. "Rachel, we just want to help." She hesitated. Then her eyes landed on Emily. "You shouldn't be here," she muttered. Emily stepped forward. "We found your notebook. We know everything." Rachel's face twisted with something between relief and terror. "Then you know how dangerous this is." Before Emily could answer, a gunshot rang out. Rachel's breath hitched. Her eyes darted toward the window. Flashlights flickered through the trees. "They found us," she whispered. Bennett grabbed Emily's arm. "We need to move now." Rachel shook her head. "Number, if we all run, they'll catch us. Someone has to stay behind." Emily's chest tightened. "Rachel, no!" Rachel grabbed her shoulders. "Go! Take the files, expose them." Another gunshot. Closer this time. Bennett pulled Jessica and Emily toward the back door. Rachel stepped toward the front. A deep voice shouted, "Surround the cabin!" Rachel turned to Emily one last time. "Run!" Then she stepped outside. Emily didn't see what happened next, because she was already running. Tears blurred her vision as she fled into the night. But one thought pounded in her chest. Rachel had just sacrificed herself for them, and Emily wasn't going to let it be for nothing. Emily's legs burned as she ran through the dense forest, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, the sound of gunfire ripped through the night, each shot echoing through the trees. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't. Rachel had given her life to make sure they got away. She wasn't going to let that be in vain. Bennett's car was parked just beyond the clearing. He yanked open the door. "Get in! Now!" Jessica pushed Emily inside before climbing in after her. Bennett slammed the gas pedal and the tires spun against the dirt road before the car lurched forward, speeding away from the gunfire, from the cabin, from everything. But Emily's mind was already somewhere else. The notebook. The truth. She pulled it from her backpack, flipping through the pages, her hands still shaking. "Rachel said we had to expose them," she whispered. Bennett kept his eyes on the road. "We will." Jessica turned to him, voice tight with fear. "How? These people have everything, power, connections. They'll bury this before we can even—" Bennett cut her off. "Not if we hit them first." Emily swallowed hard. "You mean—" Bennett's jaw tightened. He took a sharp turn, the car skidding slightly on the gravel. "We go straight to the source," he said. Victor Reynolds. The warehouse loomed in front of them, cold and massive, hidden within an abandoned shipping yard. It was where Reynolds had been funneling stolen money, laundering it through shell companies, moving it through fake charities. It was where the last pieces of evidence were, and they were about to steal them. Bennett handed Jessica a small flashlight. "We need financial records, transaction logs, client lists, anything tying Reynolds to the fraud." Jessica nodded, glancing at Emily. "Stay close to me." Emily, gripping her stuffed rabbit tightly, nodded back. They moved fast. The inside of the warehouse was eerily quiet, the dim light from flickering overhead bulbs casting long shadows. Then Bennett spotted it. A locked office near the back. "This is it," he muttered. He pulled out a small tool and started working on the lock. "Give me a second." Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. They were so close. A click. The door creaked open. Inside, stacks of files, computers still running, hard drives sitting on the desk, full of proof. Jessica grabbed a pile of documents while Bennett pulled a USB from his pocket and began downloading everything. Emily scanned the room. She knew time was running out. They had to. A voice boomed from outside. "They're in here." Emily's stomach dropped. Bennett grabbed the USB, yanking it from the computer. "We need to move." Footsteps pounded down the hall. Emily's eyes darted around the office. No windows, one door, nowhere to hide. Then, her gaze landed on the fire alarm. An idea slammed into her. She bolted toward the wall, reaching up and yanking the alarm as hard as she could. A deafening siren exploded through the warehouse. Chaos. The overhead sprinklers erupted, sending water cascading down. Shouts filled the air as Reynolds's men stormed in, blinded by the sudden downpour. "Go!" Bennett yelled. Emily clutched the files to her chest and ran. Through the halls, through the confusion, slipping past guards, scrambling to figure out what had just happened. Jessica grabbed her hand, pulling her through the exit just as gunfire rang out behind them. Bennett threw open the car door. "Drive now!" Jessica slammed on the gas. The warehouse faded behind them, lights flashing, alarms blaring, the sound of screaming men in the distance. Emily's breath came in short gasps. She looked down at the soaked files in her hands, the USB in Bennett's grip. They had done it. They had everything. Victor Reynolds was finished. The next 24 hours were a blur. Bennett wasted no time. The moment they were safe, he pulled out his laptop and began uploading the files. Encrypted emails were sent to every major news outlet, whistleblower websites, and law enforcement agencies that weren't on Victor Reynolds's payroll. Emily watched as the progress bar ticked forward, her heart hammering in her chest. Once it was out, there would be no going back. A final click. A message flashed on the screen. Upload complete. Bennett exhaled. It's done. By morning, the world knew everything. Headlines exploded across the news. Billionaire Victor Reynolds, exposed in massive fraud and corruption scandal. Government officials tied to money laundering scheme, arrests imminent. Breaking, whistleblower evidence, points to fabricated charges against Michael Gaines. Social media erupted. News anchors dissected the evidence, broadcasting every incriminating document they had stolen from Reynolds' warehouse. The pressure was too much to ignore. The authorities, the ones who had been silent for too long, finally acted. 2 days later, Emily and Jessica sat on their couch watching the news unfold. A familiar face appeared on the screen, Victor Reynolds being led away in handcuffs. The once powerful businessman, his expensive suit now wrinkled, his face drained of its usual confidence, was being taken down in front of the entire world. Emily barely breathed as the reporter's voice played over the footage. After leaked documents surfaced exposing years of fraudulent activities, the FBI confirmed early this morning that Victor Reynolds has been taken into federal custody. Multiple high-ranking officials are also under investigation, and sources say more arrests will follow in the coming days. Jessica turned to Emily, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You did it," she whispered. Emily let out a shaky breath. "We did." Jessica pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. "I'm so proud of you." That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For the first time in weeks, Emily wasn't afraid. The weight that had pressed against her chest for so long was finally lifting. She still thought about Rachel, about the people who had risked everything to bring the truth to light. The fight for justice would never truly be over. But for now, as the sky turned shades of orange and purple, as her mother's arm wrapped around her shoulder, as the world finally knew the truth, Emily felt safe. As Emily sat on the porch, The weight of everything that had happened still lingered in her heart. The truth had come out. Justice had been served. But deep down, she knew. Stories like this don't end. The fight for truth, for justice, for doing what's right, it never really stops. And neither should we. If you believe in the power of truth, if you believe that one voice can make a difference, then be part of this journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay with us as we bring you more stories that challenge, inspire, and reveal the hidden truths the world needs to hear. Because in the end, it's not just about one story. It's about all of us, together.